Hello everyone, my name is Kagero and welcome to Vanguard Zero. And today, doing a initial game tips video for all the new players who are just joining Vanguard Zero for the first time. This is coming out on the global release time, so immediately you can go into the App Store, pick this up, and just play the game. This video will be covering some initial tips and tricks relating to triggers, because a lot of people are complaining about triggers with this light launch version of the game as I'm playing it, as well as the Japanese version. So, just for some initial credentials, I've played the Japanese version since the end of the Christmas event. Up into Limit Break era. I stopped just before Limit Break era, so I could play this light launch version of the global version. It came out in Singapore 2 weeks early, so players could in Singapore could test out the servers, see if they all work, get some of the initial errors cleared up, such as translation issues. And I picked it up using an APK loader because it doesn't actually restrict anyone by region. Technically, it only stops people in different regions getting it on their actual app store. All my progress will transfer over. Accidentally clicked Kai there. Yeah, shut up. So I've played a lot of this game. I'm at grade 30, I'm at legend 20, I've done everything I need to do, I've got enough VP, so I've gotten the 10 packs at the end of the season, and even 2 packs on top of that. In terms of ranking, I've made it to the top 100 before. I'm currently 126, I was in the top 100 before, several times. I'm trying to get back into that top 100 just before the season ends. But we're just going to cover some tips relating to triggers from what I've learned over my several, I think it's almost 100 hours worth of playtime or something like that. A lot of games. So, yeah, it would be over 100 hours. Let's start off with the trigger types. So let's go into Royal Paladin, because that will help explain as much as possible. So, in terms of usefulness, in terms of power, I think that the order is heal, draw, stands, and crits. So let's go from the most powerful to the least powerful. Heal triggers, you run. You can only run up to 4 of them, you run them, that's it. The only time you wouldn't run them is if you really want to push an aggressive deck that wants to win by like turn 3 or 4. Or if you're running a VP deck, a VP grinding deck. Otherwise, you run 4 heals. Pretty much, no question. If you come from original Vanguard, you already know this. What is different from regular Vanguard is the draw triggers. Draw triggers are insanely powerful. Draw triggers have only one downside. The one downside of draw triggers is they don't add any attacking power to your deck. They don't act like criticals or stands and deal extra damage. But it gives you card advantage, it fuels your deck, and the downside of the original game, which was not having enough guard value to make up for the fact that it's drawing you a card, is actually non-existent in this game, because you don't guard with cards from your hand other than perfect guards, and you don't discard spare cards for your perfect guards either, they just straight up guard. So draw triggers are the most powerful non-heal trigger in this game, but you sometimes need stands or criticals to give your deck a little extra power. Little extra kick. That's where we get into stands. Stands are, in my opinion, way more reliable than criticals, and we'll get into why for criticals later. But stands help you push to the 5 damage limit very quickly. They help deal with those final turns. You can fit them in a lot more decks. And overall, they give a lot more aggression. They give a lot more effective aggression to most decks compared to critical triggers. However, you do have to make sure your deck can use them. Royal Paladin and Oracle think... I just want to burp, apparently. My body wants to just get gas out. Yeah, you want to be you want to be using these mainly in Oracles and Royal Paladin. This is because they can easily build boards, but they don't have much aggression in their other cards to actually push those fields to actually deal a lot of damage. So stand triggers are really effective in those two clans specifically, out of the initial 4 clans. Finally, there is critical triggers. I think they are extremely underpowered in Vanguard Zero. This is because their main purpose is to deal a lot of damage early on in the game rather than later in the game. Critical triggers are most effective if your opponent is at 2 or less damage. This is because of how PGs work. So we'll go into the actual perfect guards. So you can have up to 4 perfect guards in your deck. That's the Sentinel text right there. So when the Vanguard is hit and the activation conditions are met, perfect guard is activated, which stops the attack. It guards the attack and stops it from dealing any damage or anything. The conditions are, if you would lose if you do not guard, or your remaining damage would be 1 or less if you do not guard an attack with 2 or more critical. This makes critical triggers not very good. Crit in general is not as efficient as it is in the real game. They don't apply card advantage pressure. They only get rid of perfect guards or deal early damage. Because your opponent will guard them. In terms of how you're building your deck and stuff, you should be assuming that your opponent will guard nearly every critical trigger you end up using, as well as any crit effects you have. Unless you are really pushing the aggression, or you know your opponents will not be running as many perfect guards as they should be, which does happen. You know they won't have 4 perfect guards in those early ranks after all. As well as the computer. Critical triggers are actually really good at for getting through the story mode as well as the initial character grind. So you can unlock those 3 stars, so you can insta grind the characters. But other than that, critical triggers are mostly, there are some builds that can get away with it, are mostly useless, especially in this early game. So that's the trigger types out of the way. I'm actually meant to stay in here. So let's cover the next tip. The next tip is cycle cards. So your triggers are on your grade 3s. And if you've played real life Vanguard, you know that, the tabletop Vanguard, you know that Vanguard has what is known as the grade 3 issue. The grade 3 issue is a fundamental design flaw in how grade 3s work in Vanguard. In the initial Vanguard, it was, you just place them down as rear guards, hope that they work well as rear guards. There was not really much efficiency to it. Legion, throughout most of original Vanguard, grade 3s were not really covered. They tried doing things like, say, cross rides, which were meant to, so you go through your first grade 3, and then you ride again with another grade 3, and that will help get grade 3s out of your hand. Stride pretty much completely fixed the issue in being able to use grade 3s to stride, and V-Series did it by introducing markers. In early Vanguard, though, the only option you have is cycling effects. So here is Make Maiden Lien. Rest this unit to discard a card from your hand and draw a card. This is the exact same text it had in the original game. In original Vanguard, it was sort of used, but eventually was phased out because it was not a very powerful booster rearguard or anything like that. It was just cycle. However, in Vanguard Zero, you don't necessarily need to boost all of your attacks like you do in real-life Vanguard. And this means you have, effectively, a rearguard that can get rid of your spare grade 3s. Once a grade 3 gets into your hand and you're at grade 3, most of the time you don't want to be rewriting, you don't really have any use for them other than being attackers. With cycle cards, you can get rid of them from your hand and draw a new card, and this new card will likely be a grade 2 or a grade 1. Now, some people are actually scared of doing this. This is because if you draw a trigger, this reduces the amount of triggers in your deck. Statistically though, because of how the game works, if you get a grade 3, your trigger rate goes lower. Your trigger rate drops lower than it would increase from getting a grade 2 or grade 1 from your draw. And of course, because you've cycled through your deck faster, you're actually digging through your deck, you're getting the cards you actually need to win the game faster, and you're actually triggering more. The more you cycle, the more likely you are to trigger. There is, of course, things you have to keep track of. There's a little button on the bottom of some game. Once you start a game, there is a little button at the bottom that has a critical and guard symbol. If you click that, that shows you how many triggers you and your opponent have gone through, not including your hand. So the triggers you can see in your hand, you add those to the amount of triggers you have used during the game. By using that button, you can easily track how many triggers you've got left in your deck, and you can decide whether a cycle is worth it or not. There is a number right next to that button that shows how many cards you have left in your deck. So, by doing this, you can keep track of your triggers easier, cycle when you need to increase the amount of chances you will get of a trigger. The more you cycle, the more likely you are to get triggers, bar corner cases, which is what you use tracking your triggers for. So, with that out of the way, we can finally go through the initial clan tips. So first of all, for trigger lineup, we're going to start off with Royal Paladin. I think that Royal Paladin needs draws and stands. This is because Royal Paladin, in its initial release, is insanely weak compared to the other three clans in terms of power. You need stands to be able to restand. Royal Paladin's main thing is building up a field, so if you have a field, you can use stands a lot more efficiently, and that will help you get the damage output. Unfortunately, this is because none of the real grade 3s have a damage output bar Ganslot, and Ganslot gives a crit if you counterblast 2 when you have a Blaster Blade in your soul and it's your Vanguard. Don't underestimate this. This is actually really strong considering Royal Paladin has no other damage output. Bar triggers. But of course, that's still a crit, so that will bait out some perfect guards. Comboed with some restands, that means you can probably win a lot sooner. This is not an effect to ignore. It's not like the original game where you're more effectively just ditching it for Blaster Blade and getting another grade 3 to ride. This effect is probably the strongest effect Royal Paladin has out of their grade 3s. And that's saying a lot considering Soul Saver's here, Alfred's here, who has a counterblast 3 to call a grade 2 or less card from your deck. There's even Alfred early, which is surprisingly good. It gets your Blaster Blade from your soul. But Ganslot is the only one that has any form of damage output increasing. So don't ignore Ganslot's effect. Use it. Use it. I don't see enough people using it right now. But Royal Paladin is probably the weakest clan in the game right now, mostly because that's their only real damage output. This and stand triggers. Of course, they can build a board easily, so stand triggers are pretty good in that deck, but you still need draw, and I don't find it as effective as Oracle Think Tank, which basically has everything Royal has, and then some. So, Oracle Think Tank is mostly built around drawing cards and checking the top card of your deck so you can work it out, and then tomming for game. Tom is your main power output for Oracle Think Tank. So, if you build around with Tom in mind, you're probably going to settle on stand triggers. This is because you want to get your opponent to 5 damage as fast as possible. And stand triggers do that without any risk of perfect guards stopping the damage output, and draw triggers don't get the aggression to 5 damage, but most builds do run draws because you do need fuel. However, Oracle Think Tank also has a lot of draw options. I'll get into this a lot more when I cover this deck in a separate video as a deck profile, but I run full-on stands in this deck because I think Oracle Think Tank's draw engine is enough to build up fields, use those stands to get that damage to 5, and then you slap down Tom and win the game. Now, if you don't have Tom, you can get away with crits, especially if you got Amaterasu. But, of course, that has your problems of relying on crits to do your damage output, and Tom is so good, you should be crafting Tom as soon as possible if you want to be playing Oracle Think Tank. Oracle Think Tank is the most expensive deck in the initial clans, and so you really need to be pushing those triple Rs. I was lucky. I pulled a Tom, I pulled an Amaterasu, I pulled a Kokoa, all in my initial roll. I re-rolled a few times, and then I got that, and I was like, it's all in the one clan, I will take it. And that's why I went and played Oracle Think Tank. I then crafted a second Tom and pulled the third, and I haven't really gotten to any of the others, unfortunately. But I did get 4 PGs, I've gotten everything else. I ended up with a lot of Libras. I had 4 Maiden of Libra before I got out of C rank. So I had enough draw to make this idea work. I tested around with a few trigger lineups, and the only one that truly worked was full stands. For me. Just know that this is not the regular build. So, while I'll recommend running full stands and going through this strategy, others won't. Whether you trust me or not is up to you. Next up is Nova Grapplers. Now, I actually think that Nova Grapplers and Kagero are about on par with each other. Nova Grappler becomes the strongest deck as of the next wave of support because Perfect Riser is really, really strong. But right now, they are basically tied with Kagero, in my opinion, and they're about as cheap. You mostly want to be relying around Gold Rutile and Lionheart. Lionheat. With the Shurikaiser being the case of, if you pull a Shurikaiser, you use a Shurikaiser. He's really strong when you got him, but you don't need to craft him or anything before you go into, say, Death Army Lady and Death Army Guy. You actually want to get as many of those as you can before going into a Shurikaiser. Cosmo Lord is the one you want to avoid, and Brutal Jack will be the case of you craft it after you get 4 Shurikaisers, and if you pull him, he's not bad. He's 11k, he blocks a lot more attacks than he should, and of course you restanding him. He's really, really effective once you restand him, but but none of the triple Rs are as important as getting Gold Rutile and Lion Heat along with the Death Armies, and that's because they just do a Shurikaiser more consistently, and this is why you run just draws. A Shurikaiser also just likes draws. Basically, you want Gold Rutile or Lion Heat to hit. If they're your Vanguard and you're running crits, this means they won't hit, they will get guarded by perfect guards. So, if you're running just draws, that will help you build your field. The main issue Nova Grapplers have, even with like Kirara and Transriser, your main goal is to build up a field as fast as possible, then use Gold Rutile and Lion Heat to just hit face, and restand your units, and just go until your opponent is at 5, and yeah. And if you've got a Shurikaiser, your final turn will be a lot stronger than would it be with Lion Heat and Gold Rutile, but Gold Rutile and Lion Heat are good enough at getting to that 5 damage, and if you've got a full field, because you're running a full set of draws, you probably do, you can hit Vanguard you can hit your opponent's Vanguard 3 times pretty damn easily. So, Novas like going full draw. I don't like stands and Nova Grapplers because they have their own stand mechanics. Though it can push a little more if you don't have full copies of Death Army Guy and Death Army Lady. And critical triggers are more effective with Ashura Kaiser, but because you also probably running Gold Rutile and Wayne Heat with Ashura Kaiser, even if you have full copies of Ashura Kaiser, I do not like using critical triggers in Nova Grapplers, period. So, Nova Grapplers, basically, you just want to be running draws. Finally, there is Kagero. Now, Kagero is funny. This deck can run any combo of the triggers. Partially because it can use the crits to hit really hard and cheese out a few early games. It can run the stands because it does build up enough field. It does just quite do that. But it doesn't need to. It can just run draws. And this is because pretty much every single one of their grade 3s, bar very, very few, are all very efficient at dealing damage. Blockade especially. So, if you're using draw triggers, that will get you into, that will just help fuel your plays, especially once you've got Blockade, you basically just want fuel. You don't need stands, you don't need crits. Blockade will do all the damage you need to do, just by existing. You place them down, fill up your field, attack, 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 3 times every turn against your opponent's face, they're going to lose eventually, is Blockade strategy. So you can get away with just draws. I don't know why I have a random crit. In fact, I actually do know why I have a random crit. It's because I didn't switch it when I built this deck. You mostly just want to be going draws, hit face. That's what Kagero does. That's all it needs to do. It's the same case as Nova Grapplers. That being said, it can run crits, it can run stands. I just don't find them as efficient as just running draws. The main thing Kagero has lacking is draw power. So if you're running full draws, that fixes the one problem Kagero has. And with that is actually everything I wanted to talk about today. So, I hope this helps you in your early games of Vanguard Zero in this initial format. Hopefully it will help you later on. I do recommend experimenting around with triggers. I, after all, found that Oracle Think Tank deck by myself through my own testing. I basically just was trying draws and stands. I found that I wasn't hitting the stands when I needed to, or that my stands would go to damage early, and I'd basically just end up with draw triggers near the end, and that wasn't dealing enough damage. So I figured, why not just run Dark Cats and a bunch of other draw options, and just push the draw as far as possible until my stands, so my stands would work. So that was from my own experimenting. I do recommend doing that. Crits are really effective in the early ranks, of course, because your opponents don't all have 4 perfect guards, but in the later ranks you want to be avoiding this. Critical triggers are nearly always good against the AI, because even though they do have perfect guards, they normally only get 1 or 2 in the game, because they're not drawing as much as proper players would, and they also attack in incorrect orders. They also don't all run draw triggers as their lineup. So there's a lot of things you can just do inefficiently. If you liked this video, I'll be doing a lot more Vanguard Zero content, even though this used to be a Pokemon channel. Yeah, sorry guys. If you were here for Pokemon content, feel free to unsubscribe if you were here for just that. But if you're interested in Vanguard Zero, hit like, hit subscribe. If you want to see more of me, I do Beyblade and Bakugan content over on Beyblade Bakugan Tournaments Australia. I also cover some TCG concepts if you want to get a little bit better at just TCGs in general. I've got quite a few of those when it's in relation to Bakugan, because Bakugan is a TCG now, for those who don't know about the reboot. Yeah, just check that out if you wish. And yeah, I will see you next time. Gyaraton out.